witnesses, and now the chair will now recognize, was waved on from Georgia. Mr. Carter, you're witness 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to wave on this committee and thank all of the witnesses here today. I've only been here for about the last 45 minutes, and I have to tell you that I'm appalled at some of the things that I've heard from the other side of the aisle about our lack of the ability to have energy independence. I'm reminded that just a little over a year ago, we had indeed achieved energy independence in this country. We had, in fact, I think, arguably achieved energy dominance. We actually passed legislation in the last session to where we could export oil. That had never been done. That had been years, decades before we had done that, since we had done that. So, to make the argument that there's no way we are ever going to be energy independent, I think is a fallacy. And I have to say that I take offense to that because, if we've learned anything about what has happened over in Ukraine, and I certainly hope we have, and certainly all of us are united behind the Ukrainians and want to do everything we can to help them. But at the same time, and I will add that I applaud the president's move today to stop buying oil from Russia here in the United States. That's a good move, something we've been calling for ever since this started, even before this started. So I'm glad that he has finally understood the importance of us doing that and being self-sufficient with oil. I have to tell you, though, I want to ask you, Mr. Holy Cross. You were asked the question by one of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle earlier, if the president called you and asked you or told you to build electric vehicles. And you, I believe, responded, no, he did not, and I believe you. Is that true?
Yeah, the electric vehicles that we're producing today and have announced are in even higher demand than we anticipated.
So you would say it's consumer driven, and I believe that's what you answered. Let me ask you, do you think the subsidies that have been offered by the federal government have had anything to do with that as well?
Well, they certainly can help when we talk about affordability and accelerating the pace that we get these vehicles in consumer hands. So well, yes, we're supportive.
Let me ask you, Mr. Holy Cross, and I mean this sincerely, I'm not trying to be cute or anything here, but how many gas stations did the federal government build when Ford first put out the Model T?
Well, the infrastructure around gas stations and over 120 years ago, as we introduced vehicles to the masses, the key thing for us has been that you get out of this chicken and egg debate about what needs to come first. And
understand, but we had to have gas stations back then, and I'm taking your answer as being none. The federal government did not subsidize any gas stations when the Model T first came out. Why is it that today, if it's being consumer driven, as you say, and that your company and the other companies building these EVs, and don't get me wrong, I'm all for electric vehicles. I think it's great. But I have to make the point that this is a result, or largely a result, of the subsidies that are being offered by the federal government. Why should the federal government be funding EV charging stations?
Well, again, I think it's to accelerate the pace that we get these vehicles into customer hands for the variety of benefits we've been talking about today, both in terms of our competitiveness as a country, the competitiveness of our local industry, for manufacturers like us that employ more workers, hourly workers, to build vehicles and sell more vehicles in this country. This is all about sustaining that leadership and meeting the demand these vehicles are driving from customers.
Understood. But if it is consumer driven, as you indicated, then why isn't Ford willing to put down the necessary investment for its own products like electric vehicles?
Well, we're making huge investments, both in the vehicles and in partnerships to help increase infrastructure and all the other services that have to come along in the broader ecosystem to make these vehicles really provide the benefits for society. So we are.
Thank you, Mr. Holy Cross. I appreciate your responses, and I understand where you're coming from, but at the same time, I have to make the point that This administration, from the get-go, from day one, declared war on fossil fuels. Exactly. That's what happened. Now, look, I'm all for renewable energy. I'm all for electric vehicles. But at the same time, this war on fossil fuels has to stop. We have to adopt all of the above type energy strategy. Fossil fuels has a place in the future here. We're never going to be able to achieve what we're trying to achieve without making sure that fossil fuels are utilized. We are already, we've decreased emissions in this country more than in the last decade than the next 12 countries combined while still growing our economy. We can do it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Dr. Ruiz from California. Dr. Ruiz, you're recognized for 5 minutes.